All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today's deep dive takes us into the world of Adam Smith and his masterpiece, The Wealth of Nations. It can seem like a pretty dense read, but trust me, it's full of amazing insights that are still relevant today, even in our modern economy.
Yeah, what's cool about The Wealth of Nations is that it's not just some dry economic textbook, you know. It's full of stories and observations about how people actually behave.
So true. It helps us understand how economies work in the real world, not just in theory.
Exactly.
So where do we even start with a book like this? I mean, it's a classic for a reason, right? There's so much to unpack.
Well, maybe we could start with one of Smith's most famous ideas.
Oh yeah, like the division of labor.
Absolutely. Smith thought that the division of labor is like a core driver of productivity and economic growth.
Oh, okay, so break that down for me.
Think of it this way. When people specialize in doing like specific tasks, they get a lot more efficient and skilled at those things.
It's like comparing a modern assembly line to one single person, like a craftsman trying to build a whole car from scratch.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Instead of everyone trying to do everything themselves,
Right.
we focus on what we're each good at,
Hmm.
and then we trade our specialized skills or products with each other.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And this ability to exchange goods, that's essential.
Yeah.
Lets individuals focus on their strengths and then trade their surplus for things that they need from other people.
It's like this positive feedback loop, right?
Yeah.
Where specialization leads to more productivity,
Uh-huh.
which leads to even more trade,
Exactly.
which leads to even more specialization.
Yeah, it keeps building on itself.
This makes me think about how interconnected our economy is today. I mean, think about it. We rely on this vast network of specialized producers, service providers for everything. Think about our food,
Mm,
our technology, everything.
exactly. And it all goes back to, Smith's thinking about the division of labor. He even had this great little story about a boy who, just to make his job easier, he figured out a way to automate part of his work.
Wow. So even back then people were trying to work smarter, not harder.
Totally. It's like ingrained in us, I think.
That's such a great anecdote. It reminds me that innovation often comes from people trying to do things more efficiently.
Yeah.
So we've got specialization, we've got trade.
Right.
What else did Smith think was super crucial for economic development?
Well, he actually had some interesting thoughts about transportation,
Oh, interesting.
particularly water carriage.
Water carriage. Got it.
Yeah, he observed that areas that had access to waterways, they tended to develop a lot faster economically.
That makes sense. It's easier to move, big shipments of goods by boat than by horse and cart.
Right. Especially over long distances.
For sure.
Yeah, and this allowed these regions with with access to waterways, they could reach much bigger markets,
Okay.
leading to again more specialization, more economic growth. He even talked about how the North American colonies, how that shaped them. Settlements naturally clustered along coasts and rivers.
Right, because those were the economic arteries of the time.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing to think about how something as simple as access to water could have such a huge impact on economic development.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's interesting to think about how transportation infrastructure, it still shapes our economies today. Think about railroads,
Uh-huh.
highways,
Yeah.
airports.
They've all had massive impacts on, how cities and regions grow.
Totally.
Absolutely.
Mm.
So Smith's his points about transportation, they really highlight how important infrastructure is for economic development.
Okay.
Connecting markets, making it easier for goods and services and people to move around.
Yeah. Right. Makes sense. But let's shift gears for a second.
Okay.
Let's go from shipping lanes to price tags. Let's talk about labor, value, and pricing.
Okay. Sounds good.
What was Smith's take on how prices are actually determined? I mean, we don't pay for things in, hours of labor these days, right?
Right. We use money. But Smith, he actually started with this idea that labor is the ultimate source of value. He called it the labor theory of value, meaning the real price of anything. It comes down to the amount of labor that it took to produce it.
So the more labor intensive something is to create, the more it's inherently worth.
Yeah, basically. But of course, there are other factors too.
Right.
Smith knew that money is a convenient way to like represent value.
Makes sense.
Allows for more complex transactions than, just bartering. He even saw how different metals were used as coinage based on like the size of the transaction. Gold for big purchases, silver for like moderate ones,
Hmm.
and then copper for like smaller amounts.
It's like the evolution of money right there in Smith's observations.
Exactly.
So cool. But if labor is like the basis of value, how do things like profit and rent fit into this whole picture?
Good question. So Smith said that the price of any commodity, it's actually made up of three parts: wages for the labor, profit for the entrepreneur, and then rent for the person who owns the land, or resources used in the process.
Okay, so it's not just about like the physical work of making something. There's this whole network of people involved, and they all like add value in different ways.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. To give you an example of how these three parts like work together, imagine a farmer who grows wheat. He's earning wages for his labor out in the fields, profit from selling the wheat, and then he might be paying rent on the land that he's using.
So the farmer like embodies all three parts of that value: labor, profit, and rent.
Yeah, it's like this little microcosm of the whole economic system.
It's like, whoa, it's like right there. But of course, prices don't just, stay the same. They go up, they go down, they fluctuate, in the market. What did Smith say about that?
Well, Smith knew that the balance between supply and demand plays a huge role in determining those market prices.
Mm.
If a lot of people want something, but there's not much of it around, the price goes up.
Basic economics, right? Supply and demand.
Right. And then if there's too much of something and not many people want it, the price goes down.
Okay, so supply and demand 101. But didn't Smith kind of go a little bit deeper than that?
He did. He actually he focused on what he called effectual demand, meaning demand that's actually backed up by buying power.
It's not enough to just like want something. You have to be able to actually afford it.
Right.
Wishful thinking doesn't like move markets, right?
Yeah,
You need cold hard cash to make a difference.
we got it. And this whole interplay between supply demand and that purchasing power
Yeah.
that leads to the fluctuations we see in prices all the time.
Hmm.
He used the example of corn. Production varies from year to year depending on the weather,
Right.
leading to like price instability. And he compared that to manufactured goods, like cloth, for example,
Yeah.
which tends to have more stable prices because production can be controlled more easily.
Oh, interesting. So like some things are just naturally more prone to price swings than others.
Okay.
Okay, makes sense. But within this whole dynamic market, there's also like the human element we have to consider.
Right.
What did Smith have to say about that relationship between workers and employers? It's often kind of tense.
Yeah. He observed that workers often formed um, groups, kind of like early unions, I guess you could say, to try and get better wages,
Yeah.
better working conditions, and of course, the employers often resisted this.
Yeah, it's this power struggle that we still see
Oh,
today.
for sure. And Smith, he noticed that workers sometimes resorted to things like protests, strikes, even violence sometimes
Yeah.
to try to like force the issue.
Yeah.
But he also saw how those tactics often backfired, leading to like punishment for the workers
Yeah.
or even worse.
So it was like risky business to stand up to your employer back then.
It was very much so.
But let's get back to like individual wages for a second.
Okay.
What factors did Smith think actually influenced how much someone could earn?
Well, he identified 5 key factors. First, there's like how agreeable or disagreeable the job itself is. Jobs that are dangerous, difficult or unpleasant,
Yeah.
those tend to command higher wages to kind of like compensate for that hardship.
Yeah, I can see that. No one wants to like risk their life or do backbreaking labor for, pennies.
Exactly. Then there's the cost of learning the trade. Occupations that require a lot of training or education, they naturally pay more because those skilled workers, they're in higher demand.
It pays to invest in your education and skills. Literally.
Yeah, literally. And then there's the constancy or inconstancy of employment. Jobs that are only available part of the year or that are like unpredictable in nature, they often pay more too.
To like make up for those periods of unemployment?
Exact. Smith actually,
Yeah.
he gave this example of London coal heavers. They earned like a premium when work was available because their jobs totally depended on when the coal ships would arrive.
So their wages had to like reflect that risk, that uncertainty that they constantly face.
Right, exactly.
Okay, makes sense. So what were the other factors?
The fourth factor is how much trust is required in the job. Jobs that involve, handling valuable goods or money, they naturally have higher wages because trustworthiness, that's a valuable commodity.
Yeah, like a good reputation can be just as valuable as a strong back or like a sharp mind.
Absolutely. And then finally, there's the probability of success in the employment. Occupations where there's a high risk of failure, or where like only a few people actually achieve big success, they tend to offer higher potential rewards.
Oh, so like entrepreneurs
Yeah.
or people in like highly competitive fields.
Yeah, yeah. The possibility of those big wins, it attracts people despite the risks.
Let's high risk, high reward, right?
Exactly.
So wow, Smith's view of wages, it was like pretty nuanced.
It was. It wasn't just about, supply and demand. It's this whole web of factors that reflect the nature of the work itself and the social and economic context too.
Totally. It's like fascinating.
Yeah, he recognized that people are motivated by a mix of things,
For sure.
and that wages, they reflect not just the value of the work, but also the risks, the skills, even the social perceptions that go
Yeah.
along with different jobs.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Now, what about the other side of the equation? Profits. How did he see profits actually being generated, and how did they relate to wages?
Well, he noticed that unlike wages, profits are way more sensitive to changes in the market.
Okay.
And he illustrated this with the example of linen manufacturing.
Okay.
If profits in linen production go up, the price of linen is affected a lot more dramatically than if the wages of the linen workers went up.
Interesting. So changes in profits have a bigger ripple effect on prices than changes in wages do.
Yeah, you could say that. And then he compared the like relatively stable profits of most businesses to the volatility of profits in riskier ventures.
Oh, like smuggling.
Yeah, exactly like smuggling.
High risk, high reward. Smugglers might make like a killing sometimes.
Right.
But they also face like the constant threat of getting caught and losing everything.
Exactly. Big risk, big potential reward. But overall, Smith concluded that profit rates across different industries, they tend to be more similar than wage rates
Yeah.
because competition within those industries, it drives down those excessive profits over time.
So the market acts as this kind of like leveling force, preventing any one industry from becoming like way more profitable than others.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. However, Smith also saw that government policies, they could sometimes create these artificial inequalities in the market.
Okay, so instead of like letting the invisible hand of the market, do its thing, the government was sometimes stepping in and messing things up.
Basically, yeah. He saw three main ways that European policies were creating these economic distortions back then. First, they restricted competition in certain professions, made it hard for new people to enter. Second, they actually increased competition in other professions, so encouraged too many people to enter. And then third, they got in the way of the free movement of labor and capital, both within countries and between countries.
So it was this like mixed bag of interventions and not always with like positive outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. And those policies often had unintended consequences. For example, apprenticeship laws, which were initially meant to guarantee quality in those skilled trades, they ended up limiting entry into those same trades.
Oh, so they were like backfiring in a way.
Yeah, driving up prices and creating all these artificial barriers. He actually he used this example of coachmakers and wheelwrights.
Yeah.
A coachmaker couldn't legally make their own wheels, but they had to buy them from a master wheelwright because that was an older, more established trade. But then a wheelwright, without any official apprenticeship as a coachmaker, they could build whole coaches
Yeah.
because that trade was relatively new.
Wow, that sounds like so frustrating.
It
All
was,
because of like some arbitrary rule based on like when the trade came into being.
yeah, it just it showed how absurd those regulations were. Then you had corporations, which Smith saw as often serving to protect monopolies
Hmm.
and prevent prices from falling to their to their natural levels.
So instead of like encouraging competition, they were actively like stifling it.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, how did all of this impact like the balance between towns and rural areas?
That's a great question.
I mean, from what we've talked about so far, it sounds like these policies probably favored towns over the countryside, right?
That's exactly what Smith argued.
Yeah.
These policies often concentrated wealth in urban centers,
Yeah.
giving towns this unfair advantage.
Right. Right. So it wasn't just about geography, it was about like the rules of the
It
game and
was.
how they like distributed opportunities and rewards.
Exactly.
Okay. So speaking of rules, Smith had like a lot to say about another factor that played a big role in the economy, land,
Right.
and specifically rent. Okay? So from like the bustling city streets to the quiet fields, let's dig into Smith's views on rent. What made rent so interesting to him?
Well, Smith viewed rent as a type of monopoly price. He
Yeah.
said it wasn't based on the cost of like improving the land,
Okay.
but rather on what a farmer could afford to pay for using it.
So if a piece of land is like super fertile, it produces a ton of valuable crops, they
Well,
can command a higher rent.
exactly. And the potential profitability of different uses for that land also like comes into play. Smith used this example of a kitchen garden. Its rent might be subsidized by a fruit wall that benefits from those higher prices of fruit.
It's like the land itself has a portfolio of assets, and rent is like the return on those assets.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And this principle, it applies not just to agricultural land, but also to natural resources like coal, tin, those sorts of things.
Okay, so how did Smith see the pricing of like natural resources working?
He argued that things like transportation costs and the productivity of the most fertile mines, those were key factors.
Okay.
For example, coal prices. They're basically regulated by the most productive coal mine in a region.
Oh, interesting.
Because mine owners, they're competing with each other, so they drive those prices down, and then the cost of transportation also limits how far that coal can be, transported and sold profitably.
Right. So just like with land, the price of a resource, it's tied to its potential for making money, right?
Yeah.
And all goes back to like productivity and the ability to reach those markets.
Exactly. And Smith, he also looked at historical trends in grain prices in England,
Okay.
analyzing things like the size of bread and ale,
Okay.
which was this 13th century law that regulated bread prices
Mm-hmm.
based on wheat prices.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was fascinated by how prices went up and down over time,
Right.
and what those changes revealed about broader economic conditions.
He was like an economic detective
Mhm.
using the past to try and understand the present.
Exactly, a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this detective work, it led him to some really important insights
Okay.
about the role of money and banking in an economy.
Okay. So now we're moving into the world of finance. What does Smith have to say about money and the institutions that manage it?
Well, he started with this simple but really profound observation.
Okay.
Money itself, it's a form of circulating capital, and just like maintaining roads and bridges, maintaining a money supply, it takes resources,
Yeah.
and it deducts from the net revenue of a society.
So money isn't just this like magical thing that appears out of nowhere.
Yeah.
There are actual like real costs
Yeah.
associated with creating it
Yeah.
and keeping it like flowing through the economy.
Exactly. And he also went on to explore this concept of what's called the carrying trade,
Hmm.
which is basically using capital to help facilitate trade between foreign countries. He saw this as a way to generate profits, but he also recognized the potential dangers of too much paper money being issued by banks.
Oh, too much money chasing too few goods. It sounds like a recipe for inflation.
Right. He was very aware of that risk. He even pointed to a specific example of a Scottish bank that failed because of its overly generous lending practices.
Mm.
This really showed the importance of careful banking
Yeah.
and managing the money supply really carefully. Smith recognized the trade-offs between using paper money versus gold and silver,
Yeah.
understanding that paper money, it carries bigger risks,
Right.
particularly in times of crisis.
So he wasn't like totally for paper money, right? He saw the good and the bad, the benefits, but also like the potential downsides.
Exactly. He even suggested some specific ways to regulate banks
Oh, wow.
to try and keep the public safe, which is pretty remarkable considering this was way before modern central banking systems.
Yeah. It's incredible how many of these issues are still relevant, today.
They are.
We're still having those debates about how to manage money, how to regulate banks, and how to prevent, financial meltdowns.
Yeah, for sure. Smith's ideas, they give us this really valuable historical perspective
Right.
on these challenges that are still with us. He knew that financial systems, they're complex
Right.
and delicate,
Right.
requiring careful management and a good dose of caution.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From like the division of labor to the role of government to the complexities of money and banking. What's like the common thread running through all of this? What ties it all together?
Well, I think Smith, he had this really holistic view of how economies actually work. He saw how individuals, businesses, and governments, they all interact to create this complex, interconnected system.
Totally. It's not just about like looking at some narrow economic indicators.
Yeah.
He understood that like real economic prosperity depends on a healthy social and political environment too.
Absolutely.
Where like people can be free to pursue their own goals.
Right. A place where individual initiative can thrive.
Yeah. And speaking of thriving, I think we need to dive into like one of Smith's most important ideas about how economies actually grow.
Okay.
Didn't he have this whole theory about the natural progress of opulence?
He did.
Okay, so what is that all about?
It's a fascinating idea.
Mm.
He believed that economies naturally evolve through these series of stages, with agriculture as the foundation for everything else.
Okay, so it all starts with the land.
In a way, yeah. Smith saw agriculture as that primary source of wealth in a society, because it's what generates that surplus produce that allows for other industries to develop.
So you need to have like enough food to feed everyone before you can start thinking about like, building factories or trading luxury goods.
Exactly. And he also he emphasized this mutually beneficial relationship between towns and the countryside. Towns provide a market for that surplus agricultural produce.
Right.
And that stimulates further development.
But he also recognized that historically certain things had often discouraged agricultural development in Europe.
We did. He pointed to things like trade restrictions, for example, and the feudal system as hindering the progress of agriculture. And this brings us to another big theme in The Wealth of Nations, the role of government policy in promoting or hindering economic growth.
We've already kind of touched on this, haven't we? Like with the apprenticeship laws
We have.
and that tendency for corporations to create monopolies.
Right.
But it seems like Smith had like a lot more to say about the proper role of government in the economy.
He did. And one of his most famous critiques, it was aimed at the mercantile system,
Oh.
which dominated European economic thinking for centuries.
Okay, so what was the mercantile system all about, and why did Smith have a problem with it?
Well, the mercantile system was based on this idea that a nation's wealth, it was measured by how much gold and silver it had stockpiled. Governments tried to maximize their holdings by encouraging exports and discouraging imports, often through things like tariffs, quotas, subsidies. They basically wanted to hoard treasure and protect their own industries from foreign competition.
So it was all about like national self-interest,
It was.
even like at the expense of other nations.
Yeah, and Smith, he argued that this was a totally misguided approach that actually hurt economic growth. He believed in the power of free trade to create wealth and prosperity for all nations involved.
He was like a pioneer of of free market thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
But didn't he also recognize that there were like legitimate roles for government in a healthy economy?
He did. He understood that that governments, they're responsible for providing certain public goods and services that are essential for, for a society to function properly.
Right. Things that like the market alone wouldn't provide.
Exactly. Things like roads, bridges, education.
Oh.
Imagine trying to build a network of roads if every mile was funded by private tolls.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine having to like stop every few miles to pay a toll.
It'd be a nightmare.
It would make like traveling a nightmare.
Yeah. Smith saw that that these public works, they benefit everyone, not just individuals who use them directly, and he argued that it's the government's job to pay for those essential services. He even debated the different ways that these projects could be funded, whether through tolls or general taxation. He's very thoughtful about the practical side of paying for public goods.
So beyond like just building roads and bridges, what other roles did Smith see for government in a healthy economy?
Well, he put a lot of emphasis on the importance of a stable legal system.
Okay.
He saw the government as responsible for making and enforcing laws that protect property rights.
Yeah.
And make sure that contracts are upheld.
Yeah, it makes sense. If you can't be sure that like agreements will be honored or that your property is safe, it's hard to build that trust and to do business effectively.
So right where we left off, Smith was very much against the mercantile system and all its restrictions. He really believed in the power of free trade. But it wasn't just like open markets in a general sense. He actually dug into some of the specific trade policies that were in place back then, like those bounties and drawbacks. Remember those?
Oh, yeah, those things came up, bounties and drawbacks. It sounds a little bit like a magic act, to be honest. What were those about again, and what was Smith's take on them?
So you got to imagine you're like a government back in the 1700s, right? And you're trying to give your domestic industries a boost. A bounty was basically like a cash prize, a subsidy that was given to producers of certain goods to encourage production and exports. A drawback, on the other hand, was a refund of taxes or duties that were paid on imported goods, but only if those goods were later exported.
Okay, so bounties were like an incentive to produce more, and drawbacks were like a way to reduce the cost of imported stuff that was meant to be like resold somewhere else.
Yeah, you got it. But Smith, he was really skeptical of those policies, especially bounties. He saw them as like market manipulation, something that could actually hurt the economy over time.
Oh, really? I mean, how so? It seems like giving money to producers would encourage them to, make more stuff.
Right.
Which could lead to like lower prices for consumers.
That was the idea in theory.
Yep.
But Smith argued that it often backfired. Bounties, they artificially inflated prices, and they took resources away from more efficient uses. He pointed out that it created this like double tax on people.
Oh, okay. How so?
First, they paid taxes to fund the bounty in the first place,
Right.
and then they paid higher prices for those subsidized goods.
Oh, sneak.
Right. Like he used the example of corn bounties,
Yeah.
which led to higher corn prices domestically, even though they were supposed to be encouraging exports. So consumers ended up footing the bill twice. And the whole economy kind of suffered because of that distortion of natural market forces.
So not so magical after all.
Not really, no.
Mm-hmm.
Drawbacks he saw as potentially less harmful, especially if they were used to kind of neutralize the negative effects of import duties. But overall, he favored a system with minimal government interference. Just let individuals pursue their own economic interests freely.
Less meddling, more freedom. It seems like that's kind of a recurring theme in Smith's work, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But he wasn't like advocating for a complete absence of government.
No.
He did see the importance of government in providing those public goods and services, right?
Absolutely. Smith, he understood that certain things like roads, bridges, education, essential for a society to thrive. But they're unlikely to be provided by private companies on their own.
Yeah, because like who wants to be in charge of building roads when you have to like rely on private tolls to fund everything.
Right. It would be chaos.
Yeah.
Totally
Your worst
inefficient.
nightmare.
Yeah. Smith realized that that these public works they help everyone, not just the people who use them, directly. And he argued that it's the government's responsibility to pay for and maintain those essential services. He even got into like debating the different ways that these projects could be paid for,
Yeah.
whether through tolls or general taxation or other methods. He was really thinking about the nuts and bolts of funding these public goods.
So like really practical stuff.
Very practical.
Okay. But beyond just, building things like roads and bridges, what other roles did Smith see for government in a healthy economy?
Well, he put a lot of emphasis on having a stable legal framework.
Okay.
He saw the government as responsible for setting up and enforcing laws that protect property rights, make sure that people honor their contracts.
Makes sense. I mean, if you can't be sure that like agreements are going to be, followed through on, or that your property's actually safe, it's really hard to trust anyone.
Right, exactly. And it's hard to do business effectively too.
Yeah, it's like the foundation has to be solid.
Right. So Smith, he understood that that a reliable legal system, that's the bedrock of a free market economy. He also talked about this idea of natural liberty, the idea that individuals, they should be free to pursue their own economic interests without the government butting in all the time.
This sounds a lot like modern free market capitalism, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Smith is, he's often considered the father of modern economics.
Right.
And his ideas about individual liberty, free markets, limited government, they've been hugely influential, shaping economic thought and policy for centuries.
So wow, huge impact. Now speaking of influence, Smith, he didn't shy away from those big like complex issues, right? Like colonialism.
No, he didn't. He was like right in there.
He was a really sharp observer of how the mercantile system, it shaped those European colonial policies,
Yeah.
especially in the Americas. He recognized that Britain definitely benefited economically from its colonies,
Yeah.
especially through that system of enumerated commodities.
Enumerated commodities. Okay, remember that term coming up. Can you remind me what that was all about again?
Yeah, so these were goods that the colonies were only allowed to export to Britain.
Yeah.
So it basically gave British merchants a monopoly over those trades.
So it was a way for Britain to like control the flow of valuable stuff,
Right.
like sugar, tobacco, timber from the colonies back to the mother country.
Exactly, control those resources.
Mm-hmm.
But while Smith acknowledged the economic benefits that Britain was getting, he also saw the downsides of this whole system.
Okay, like what?
He argued that it distorted those trade patterns, and it held back the economic development of the colonies themselves.
Yeah.
He thought that the colonies would actually be better off if they could trade freely with other countries.
So it's like he was kind of already planting the seeds for the idea of economic independence for the American colonies, even though the revolution was like still decades away.
That's a great point. He could see that that tension building. Smith also pointed out how the distance between the colonies and the British government, it made it really hard to govern effectively. I mean, it's not easy to rule from across an ocean, right? Especially when communication and travel were so slow.
It's like trying to manage a business from like thousands of miles away,
Right.
and you've only got letters and couriers to rely on.
Exactly. It's bound to lead to misunderstandings, frustrations.
Big time.
Yeah. And Smith, he believed that this distance, combined with the growing economic power of the colonies, it was going to lead to conflict at some point. He even explored this idea of Britain actually granting independence to its American colonies, which was pretty radical thinking back then. Wow, he was like way ahead of his time. But it's interesting to think about how like those same tensions between economic interests and political control, they're still playing out in the world today.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Smith's observations about colonialism, they highlight that complex relationship between power economics and that that desire for autonomy.
Yeah.
He was especially critical of those exclusive trading companies, like the British East India Company
Right, right.
and the Dutch East India Company that were given these monopolies over trade with the East Indies.
So it wasn't just like colonies, right? It
Right.
was like whole regions of the world
Yeah.
that were being exploited by these powerful corporations.
That's right. And Smith saw these monopolies as harmful, not just to the people in those regions that were, subject to their control, but also to the economies of the European nations that created them. Oh, wow. So they were like bad for both the colonized and the colonizers, ultimately.
In the long run, yeah.
It's like a classic case of short-sighted greed leading to bad consequences for everyone.
Exactly. Smith, he thought that free and open trade with those natural checks and balances, it was a much better way to promote economic prosperity and global well-being. He saw those trading companies as benefiting a select few, at the expense of everyone else.
It's a good reminder that even in a supposedly free market, concentrated power and special privileges can lead to like distortion and inequality.
Absolutely, a very important point. Now let's shift gears a little bit
Yes.
and dive into another key aspect of Smith's work: his ideas about government revenue and how it should be generated.
Okay, so from the global spice trade to the world of tax codes, let's get into the nitty-gritty of government finance. What did Smith have to say about taxes?
Well, he identified three main sources of government revenue: taxes on rent, taxes on profit, and taxes on wages.
So essentially, he was saying like tax the three main factors of production.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right.
And he had some specific ideas about how those taxes should be, structured, how they should be levied.
Yeah.
For example, he argued that that taxes on rent should be based on the actual rent that's received, not on some made up assessment.
Yeah.
He also believed that the taxes on profit they should be moderate and designed in a way that would discourage investment or risk taking.
Makes sense. You don't want to like punish people for being successful, right? Or stifle, that entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, exactly. And when it came to taxes on wages, Smith, he believed they should be levied proportionally to the ability to pay.
So like a progressive tax system?
Yeah. Yeah, he didn't use that term, but that's essentially what he was getting at. He also he stressed the importance of taxes being predictable, consistent.
Okay.
So that people and businesses could plan accordingly. He was really against those arbitrary taxes, the kind that were just subject to the whims of whoever was in charge.
Yeah, fairness, predictability, efficiency. Those sound like Smith's guiding principles for a good tax system.
Yeah, they were. And these principles, they're still debated pretty vigorously today. Governments are always trying to, balance the need to raise money with the desire to create a fair and efficient tax system, one that doesn't get in the way of economic growth.
Right. A tough balancing act. Now we've talked about the revenue side, but what about the spending side? Where did Smith think the government's priorities should be?
He thought that the government spending should be focused on those public works and institutions that contribute to the overall prosperity and well-being of a nation.
So we've already talked about infrastructure.
Right.
But what other kinds of institutions did he have in mind?
Well, he saw education as a crucial investment.
Yeah.
Arguing that an educated population is essential for economic and social progress.
Mm-hmm.
He also emphasized the need for a fair and efficient justice system.
Okay.
To protect property rights, enforce contracts, and ensure the rule of law. He even recognized how important public health measures were to prevent the spread of disease.
So he wasn't just thinking about the economy in a narrow sense. He understood that a truly prosperous society requires investment in all sorts of areas that contribute to people's well-being.
Exactly. Smith had this much broader view of what national wealth actually is. He thought that that government spending should be aimed at creating an environment where individuals could thrive, could innovate, could contribute to the common good.
He also had some interesting observations about the role of the military,
Yep,
right?
he did.
What did he have to say about that?
Well, he recognized that national defense, that's a core function of government,
Right.
and that maintaining a strong military is key for protecting a nation's interests, both domestically and abroad. However, he also warned against excessive military spending, arguing that it could drain resources away from more productive uses.
So it's about like finding that balance again.
It is, yeah.
Investing enough to deter threats, but not so much that it becomes this huge burden on the economy, or that it prevents investment in those other important areas.
Exactly, and he made some insightful observations about how the nature of military forces, how that's changed over time. He noted that shift from militias, which were common in earlier societies, to those standing armies, which became necessary as nations got bigger, more complex. He recognized that that while standing armies are more expensive to maintain, they're also more effective in defending against those large scale threats.
So it's another example of how economics and political developments they go hand in hand, right?
Right, yeah.
As societies evolve, so do the institutions that govern them.
Yeah, absolutely. And this understanding of that that dynamic relationship between economics and politics, that's one of the big takeaways from the Wealth of Nations. It's not just a book about economics in this narrow sense. It's a book about how societies work, how wealth is created, how individuals and governments, how they interact to shape their collective destiny.
It's amazing how relevant this book, written back in 1776, still feels today. It's like
Wow.
Smith, he could see the future of capitalism, the challenges that it would face, and those enduring questions that it would raise about about wealth, about power, about individual liberty.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. It says a lot about how deep his insights were, and the lasting power of his ideas. He was really a visionary thinker who helped lay the groundwork for modern economic thought.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered so much in this deep dive.
We have.
We explored the division of labor, the invisible hand of the market, the pitfalls of protectionism, that tricky relationship between government and the economy,
Right.
and so much more. Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. It's truly a treasure trove of wisdom and insight.
It really is, and we've honestly just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
Oh yeah, so much more to think about in this complex and fascinating work.
But for now, I think we need to take a little break, just gather our thoughts.
Yeah.
Join us in the final part of this deep dives, where we'll reflect on Smith's legacy and the lasting power of his ideas in shaping the world that we live in today.
Okay, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. I feel like we've really gone through like the heart of this book: the invisible hand, specialization, protectionism, the role of government.
It's been a journey.
It really has. And what strikes me is how much of what Smith was saying back in the 1700s, it still like totally applies to, our modern globalized world.
It's pretty amazing.
So as we wrap up this exploration, what are some of those key like takeaways that we can actually apply to, to our own lives and how we understand the world today?
Well, I think one of the biggest lessons is that power of specialization.
Yeah.
And exchange. Smith showed us how focusing on what we're good at and then trading with other people, it lets us create so much more wealth than we ever could if we were just working by ourselves. And this isn't just for individuals; it's for businesses and for whole countries too.
It's like that saying, do what you do best and outsource the rest. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And we see that like everywhere in our modern economy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've got specialized doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers,
Yeah,
software
this
developers.
goes on and on.
Like everybody's specialized.
And even whole countries specialize in producing, certain goods or services.
That's true. Think about how much you rely on those specialized skills of countless other people
Mm-hmm.
just to go about your day.
Yeah.
Your phone, your clothes, the food you eat, the transportation you use, it all represents this massive network of specialized producers.
Yeah.
Each one, adding their expertise to create something way bigger than any one person could do alone.
Exactly.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you really stop and think about it.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to what Smith said, right? That specialization and being able to trade freely, that's what drives economic growth.
Yeah, totally. And speaking of trade, Smith was, of course, a huge supporter of free trade. He argued that it benefits all the nations involved.
Right.
He saw those protectionist policies as basically a way to hurt your own economy. They prevent competition. They stifle innovation, and in the end, they make everyone poorer.
Yeah, it's like shooting yourself in the foot,
Yeah.
economically speaking.
Yeah, he really believed that when countries focus on what they're good at and they can trade freely, everyone wins. It's more efficient. It leads to lower prices, and consumers, they get a wider variety of goods and services.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and he understood that that trade, it's not just about exchanging stuff.
Yeah.
It's also a powerful force for peace,
Oh, I'm
for
interested.
cooperation between countries. When countries are economically linked, they have a reason to keep things peaceful.
Right.
To work together to solve problems.
Yeah, there's that old saying, if goods don't cross borders, soldiers will.
Right. Exactly. Free trade, it can create those strong bonds between nations.
Okay. Based on mutual benefit and shared prosperity.
That's a great way to put it. Now, Smith also recognized, of course, the importance of government in providing those essential public goods, creating a fair legal system, investing in things like education. But he was always a little bit wary of too much government intervention. He argued that it often led to more problems than it solved.
So it's all about finding that right balance.
It is.
Right. Making sure that the government provides the support, the infrastructure for a healthy economy, but also giving individuals and businesses the freedom to try new things,
Like to innovate.
to go after their own interests.
Exactly. Too much intervention, it can stifle creativity, it can distort markets, it can create a lot of inefficiencies, but too little. And you can end up with with instability, a lack of those essential services.
Right. And even a loss of public trust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Finding that sweet spot, that's a challenge for policymakers even today.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Especially in our modern globalized world.
It is. But I think Smith's work, it gives us a really valuable framework for thinking about these issues. It reminds us that the economy, it's this complex, dynamic system.
Right.
And there's no single solution, no magic bullet that's gonna work for every situation.
Yeah. What's so interesting to me about Smith is that he wasn't just focused on, economic indicators in this narrow way. He had this much broader view of what it means to have a prosperous society. He believed in the power of individual initiative, a strong work ethic, and this idea that self-interest, when it's channeled, the right way, it can actually lead to the common good.
That's right. He talked about that invisible hand, right?
Yeah.
Of the market.
Yeah.
Where people, when they pursue their own self-interest, it can actually create benefits for society as a whole.
So it's not like a zero-sum game,
Right.
Where one person's gain is always another person's loss.
Yeah. When markets work well, everyone can can benefit.
Yeah, it's like an orchestra
Right.
where each musician plays their part and it all comes together to create this beautiful piece of music. Or maybe an even better analogy is a beehive. You know, each bee is just working for its own survival,
Mm.
but all their efforts together, they create that honey that benefits the whole hive.
I like that, yeah.
And Smith's his vision of a society based on individual liberty, free markets, limited government, it's been so incredibly influential. It's shaped the course of history, you know.
Absolutely.
It's shaped the world we live in today.
It's hard to overstate, I think, how much of an impact his work has had.
It's pretty wild to think about those ripple effects from this one book,
Mm-hmm.
published like over 200 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like a testament to the power of ideas to really change the world.
It really is. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I encourage you to keep reading Smith,
Yeah.
to keep thinking about how his ideas apply to to the economy, to the challenges that we're facing today.
Well said. And to leave you with a final thought to kind of consider this. In our world that's like more and more complex, more and more interconnected all the time, how do we find that balance
Mhm.
between, people going after their own self-interest and the need to work together to solve those big challenges?
It's the big question.
Like climate change, like inequality, like technological disruption.
Yeah, that's the challenge,
Well,
isn't it? How do we use the power of markets and human ingenuity
right.
while also making sure that everyone benefits from prosperity,
Yeah.
and that we're all working together to build a future that's sustainable for generations to come.
It's a question that Adam Smith himself, probably thought about.
I'm sure he did.
And it's one that we have to wrestle with if we really want to create a world where everybody has a chance to thrive.
Absolutely. Smith's work, it gives us a foundation for those conversations.
Yeah.
It reminds us, about markets, about liberty, about that tension that's always there between self-interest and the common good.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the wealth of nations. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.